Hi, I'm Jenny Brown. Welcome to this week's MFB News. I hope you're all really well. Hope you had an amazing coronation weekend. We had a lovely time in Dorset. Thankfully, only one day of rain and one day of sun, so it could have been a lot worse. I hope you had a great time and roll on the next long weekend, which is just a couple of weeks away, I believe. In terms of what we've got for you today, we've got lots of great stuff. We've got some lender pricing changes, an update on swap rates. I'm going to do a roundup on where rates are sitting now in the kind of main. We're going to talk a bit about the Renters Reform Bill. There's been some news there that I wanted to share with you. And then also Hometrack have released their housing market data, which breaks down how different regions are performing. So rather than looking at the overall UK house prices, it breaks things down by region. Actually, there's quite a lot of disparity depending on where the properties are in terms of how they're actually doing. So we're going to go through that as well. So lots of good stuff for you this week. Okay, so lender pricing changes. So keep in mind it's been a 4-day week, so there hasn't been a huge amount, but there have been some changes. And what's really interesting is that there's some lenders are coming up and some are coming down. What we are definitely seeing is a removal of lenders' special edition products. So for those of you who watch this video regularly, you'll remember that special edition products are where, or limited edition products are where a lender will come out and say, we've got this particularly good rate, we're going to make it available for a certain either period of time or for a certain amount of money, so we're going to lend so many millions of pounds on this rate, and then once that tranche of funds has been used up, it's gone. And these rates tend to be more competitive than their standard product suite. So what we're seeing is a number of lenders withdrawing these at the moment, so these very sort of cheap comparatively products. So it's quite interesting at the moment. Swap rates are still very much stuck at just under 4%. So as of 10:30 last night, we were looking at 3.993 for 5-year swaps and 4.452 for 2-year swaps. So just really hovering at just under that 4% mark on 5-year money. So cost of funds isn't moving, which is why we're just not seeing a lot of movement from the lenders. So in terms of what we have seen, so we've seen Skipton withdraw their 5-year 70% loan to value products and then reduce everything else basically. So their pricing is now from 4.79%. So Skipton, vanilla lender, no HMOs, no multi-units, they're quite restrictive in terms of the number of properties in the background, no limited companies. But actually, in terms of them as a lender, the thing I really like about them actually, and I can't say that we use them often at Mortgages for Business, but they will, rather than credit scoring, they credit search. So actually, if there is someone who is just failing credit score, and some of you might have come across this, so you've actually got a clean credit file, you go on your your regular credit search bureau that you use at home, it's telling you you've got a score of 900 out of 999 or something. You apply for a mortgage and then declines you on credit score. Now, credit scoring is really complicated, and every lender uses a different algorithm. So you might pass with flying colours with one lender and fail with another. So it is quite complex. And lenders don't share their algorithms. So they don't sort of say, well, if you have been at your current address for less than 3 years, that gives you 10 demarcation points or anything like this. As a broker, you get to know who's more generous on their scoring and who is not. And there's lots of stuff that go into credit scoring. You know, your postcode can affect your credit score, the amount of time you've been in your job, if you're employed or self-employed. Your postcode impacts your credit scoring actually. So there's loads and loads of stuff that go into it. So having lenders who don't rely on algorithms to accept mortgage applications, but rather look at the file and say, actually, we can see a clear credit file here. We're happy with the content. We're not seeing any rapid levels of increased unsecured borrowing or anything like that. So actually we're comfortable these people make sense to lend to, rather than simply saying our computer says no to us, is really encouraging. So that's a Skipton. So rates from 4.79. Now we've also seen Bank of Ireland make reductions. Their rates are now from 4.35. Again, very similar lender to Skipton. And on that same vein, the Coventry have increased their rates. So theirs are now from 4.45. So you can see how things are kind of just teetering around a very similar level, but some are kind of marginally coming down and some are marginally going up. We've seen Fleet reduce all of their 2-year fixed rates by 0.2%, and all of their 7-year fixed rates, and this is an interesting one, are now only available for green properties, so EPC ratings of A to C. And their arrangement fees on these 7-year fixed rates have been reduced from 3% of the loan amount to 2% of the loan amount. So where that means in terms of pricing is their 2-year fixes are now from 5.29 and their 7-year rates are from 4.99%. Fleet, specialist lender, limited companies, HMOs, multi-units, that kind of stuff. Now, in terms of green mortgages, it's quite an interesting one. So lenders have been kind of trying to do a good thing, and and it's very commendable actually, because, you know, we all want to do our bit for the environment, don't we? And actually, so the lenders are sort of, what they're looking to do is look at their offering and see how they can help reward people for having green properties. And some lenders are simply saying, if you bring us a property with a better EPC rating, generally it's A to C, then we will give you a reduction on our interest rate, and it's normally sort of like 0.1, 0.15%. Other lenders are taking a slightly different stance. They're rewarding existing borrowers for making improvements, green improvements to their properties. Some lenders are offering very, very, very cheap interest rates for further advances, so additional borrowing on your existing mortgage if you make green improvements. So different lenders are taking a different approach, but I think every lender has its own agenda, and there's a reason for this. Within the future, lenders are going to be targeted to ensure that X percentage of their back book of mortgages, their existing mortgage book, is green rated. So lenders are going to be sort of focusing on driving in more of those kinds of properties, because that will help those metrics, and also looking to encourage their existing borrowers to bring up their properties. Just incidentally, we know that the expected date for the MEES changes is now going to be in 2028. Now, we've seen foundation home loans, coming back to what I said earlier, withdraw all of their special rates, special edition rates, but they've also reduced all of their sort of normal fixed rates, as it were, but up to 0.3%. So their 5-year pricing is now from 5.74, and that's on their standard offering. However, they've also reduced pricing on their short-term net rates by 0.35%. And short-term nets, we mean essentially holiday lets, Airbnb, that kind of stuff. And these are now from 6.29%. So again, foundation specialist lender, this is why your rates are starting with a 5 rather than your Bank of Ireland's and Coventry's, where they start with a 4, because these guys have a slightly different model. So where does this leave us? So as I mentioned, swap rates 3.993%. Personal borrowing, straightforward properties, 2-year fixed rates are currently from 3.69. For 5 years are from 3.94. Limited company rates, 2-year fixes from 4.29, sorry, if you don't mind paying a whopping arrangement fee, 4.69 if you want something a bit more reasonable. And on the same vein, 5-year fixed rates from 4.19 with a big fee, and 4.65 with a slightly more palatable fee. With these fees, as we always say, for some people actually, it's worth paying the big fee. I mean, some people just won't pay the fee, and that's absolutely fine. But actually, if you just do the maths, if I pay this large arrangement fee, what is my cost of borrowing over the 2 or 5 year period? How much interest am I going to pay plus fees? And that big number that you come with at the end is the overall cost of borrowing. And sometimes these big fees do work out for people. So while I am kind of fairly dismissive of them, I shouldn't be actually, because there is a place for them in the market, because they do bring a lower interest rate, which means a more generous rental calculation, which actually is very important at the moment. But likewise, sometimes these deals actually do work out better for landlords, but it's just worth doing the maths every single time you're considering a new interest rate. Now, a fairly small piece of lending criteria came out from the Mortgage Works in the last week, which I want to share with you, because I think it is actually something people don't often consider when they're taking out mortgages. So what they have said is that when they're doing the affordability assessments, the rental calculation essentially on their buy-to-let mortgages, what they're now going to do is incorporate the arrangement fee within that. So if you wanted to borrow £100,000 and the arrangement fee was £2,000 that you wanted to add to the loan, so your overall debt was £102,000, then the rental coverage would need, or calculation, sorry, would need to work for £102,000. Previously, they only do it on the actual main mortgage, so 100. Now, some people will say, well, of course you would, because you're borrowing 102,000 overall and you're paying interest on that, so the rent should have to stack up. But actually, most lenders do the rental calculation on the loan before any fees are added. Now, when you're looking at those kinds of metrics, so a £2,000 fee, actually it probably wouldn't make a huge amount of difference to your borrowing. Most people can kind of work around that. When you're working on larger mortgage numbers, say you're borrowing £500,000 in the arrangement fee. I mean, some of the mortgages at the moment have arrangement fees of 5%, so let's say £25,000. Suddenly, if you can't borrow that and you've got to find it, that can make a huge dent in the kind of money that you have to put into a deal. So I think it's just, if you are looking for a mortgage at the moment, it's just worth asking the question when you're speaking to brokers, hopefully it's us, or mortgage lenders, just saying to them, well, actually, you say I can borrow X amount of money, but does this include the arrangement fee? When the Mortgage Works makes a change like this, Mortgage Works is the largest buy-to-let lender in the UK. Lenders will look at that change and sort of look at their own existing offering and criteria and say, actually, should we be doing the same thing? So we may see a few more of these come through in the next few weeks and months. Okay, now this week we were expecting the Renters Reform Bill to be introduced into Parliament. However, I got a wire from actually a really good publication. They're very, very good. They're very across the news. It might be worth you signing up for it, called Landlord Today. So they send you news wires. And so last night one came through that actually this bill is no longer going to be introduced next week because there has been some procedural issues. And this is according to the Mirror. So, you know, take it with a pinch of salt. But basically, there's speculation that Tory backbenchers were unhappy with the very pro-tenant, anti-landlord sentiment that seems to sit around the bill. So it's kind of gone back in for review. But actually, the key point is this is still going to be coming out in the next few weeks. Now, obviously, we're going to be sending you lots of information, for those of you who subscribe to our newsletter, about the various kind of implications for landlords of the bill. But actually, there's quite a lot of landlords who aren't aware of this or are kind of probably largely ignoring it until it actually comes through. But I think actually there are a few key things that it's worth just keeping in your mind are in this paper. So it's really worth being on top of this one. So I think the key points, and there are actually in total 12, but the ones that I think are really kind of very, very important to landlords. First of all, the abolishment of Section 21. Now, you guys will know if you watch this video often that I'm currently using Section 21 to get my tenants out. I will update you on that in a minute, actually. But they're going to abolish Section 21, and that's the one that I think landlords have really kind of been absolutely, you know, devastated to hear about. So that one's in the mix. However, what they are saying is they are going to reform grounds for possession to make sure that landlords have effective means of gaining possession of their properties when necessary. Now, having attended lots of landlord events and listening to various people who are lobbying government, what they're saying the grounds are probably going to be, so you're going to have stuff like antisocial behaviour, non-payment of rent, that kind of stuff. Also, I want my property back because I want to move into it to live myself would be a fair grounds for possession, and also I want to sell it as well. So it sounds like there are actually going to be some things in there which might help soften the blow of the abolishment of Section 21, albeit it won't actually totally counter it, as it were. Other things to keep in mind, a property portal, so a place where people can essentially access property information on the property they want to rent, which will give you information on the property and the landlord who owns it, so you can kind of make sure that there's someone you want to actually rent from, the landlord's a good person, they look after their tenants well. That's really important. We actually, at Mortgages for Business, really support that one, as long as it's done properly, and there's kind of good kind of rules that sit around how you can kind of, how the information is provided and the trueness of the information, then we think actually that's a good one. And actually there's going to be one which is strengthening local councils' enforcement powers, the ability to crack down on criminal landlords. I mean, who wouldn't want that, right? That's going to be really important. Another one to keep in mind, we're going to give tenants the rights to request a pet in their property, which the landlord must consider and cannot unreasonably refuse. This is one that divides people. See, I don't have a problem with tenants having pets. I'm a pet owner myself. For some of you may have seen Otto the Schnoodle in very, very old videos when he used to make an appearance occasionally. And I've actually always been quite open to my tenants having pets in the property, and I've actually found that it's never been an issue. However, I do know there have been some real horror stories in terms of people whose pets have chewed up, you know, staircases and carpets and just made a real mess. And there are different ways that landlords kind of counter that. So look, I mean, personally, I'm not that worried about this one, but I know that some people are actually incredibly annoyed about that particular rule coming into play. But these are the kind of key points out of it. But like I say, there are 12, so we will keep you posted. But I think the key message here was for those of you who've been sort of waiting, I mean, it's been in the making for 4 years. So we've been talking about this for a long time. So I think actually whether we might not like the content of the bill, we could just do with having it out now, because actually then people can kind of understand what the rules are and start making decisions and changes accordingly. It's been delayed was the key message there. So we'll keep you posted on that as we hear more news. Hometrack have released their latest UK house price index, which makes really interesting reading. Now, I'm actually going to go into the full report next week because it is a really long report and there's some really great stuff in there. But I have to try and keep these videos as short as possible and do have a tendency to waffle on. So what I'm going to share with you instead is just the house price index in terms of regional performance, because it's really, really interesting. So I'm just going to show you what it looks like. You can see that. So what it does is it maps out lots of cities across the UK and it gives various comparisons. So the first one that I want to share with you is that the growth of property prices since 2007. So obviously this is pre the financial crisis. So how various properties have performed. So in terms of the top growth areas, If you have a house in Hastings, it would have increased 77% in value since 2007. Other top performers, Bristol 73%, Luton 71%. So these particular regions have done, or cities rather, have done incredibly well since 2007. There's a top for performers. Areas that have done really badly, and I was actually quite horrified to see these numbers because 2007 was a really long time ago. Excuse me, and there's been so much increase in house prices, particularly over the last few years. So these numbers really shocked me. And I guess the reason these growth numbers are so low is because these areas particularly suffered after the credit crisis. They had a big dip before they then recovered. So the worst performer in terms of house price growth since 2007, Burnley, 13% growth. Isn't that incredible? Dundee, 14%, and Glasgow, 14% as well. So these are the areas that have done, excuse me, the least well. Now, moving on from there. So year-on-year growth. So which areas have year-on-year done the best? So the top three cities are Derby, 6% growth, Telford, 5.9% growth, and also Rochdale, 5.9% growth. The cities which have fared the worst, the bottom three, so Oxford has just had a 0.3% growth year on year, Central London 0.7%, and Aberdeen minus 2.2%. Now, despite all the news that we're going to be hearing about house prices, actually it does feel like things have largely bottomed out now. All the people that are in sort of the property market and really understand it are all sort of saying that we think we've kind of hit the bottom and things are going to plateau and eventually start to turn around. And when you read various reports, people are really expecting house prices to return to growth either by the end of this year or early next year. But so I think it's really, really interesting to see that actually some areas are still year on year in the red, and actually most areas, the only area that's minus is Aberdeen at minus 2.2, but everywhere else still year on year are in growth territory. So actually, while I think there's no escaping the fact the housing market is having a fairly difficult time, what I would say is I think it's performed much better than some people thought it would. And like I say, it does look like things are certainly bottoming out as well. So we'll go into the full house price index next week. And like I said, there's some really interesting content in there, which I'm going to go through with you as well. So something to look forward to. And lastly, just a very quick update on my buy-to-let and getting it back. So you'll know I mentioned, for those of you who watched it last week, that my Section 21 had gone through to the court. It had been signed off. The tenants had been served notice and they had to move out by the 9th of May, which was yesterday. Yesterday came when the tenants hadn't moved out. My estate agent drove past, their cars were still in the driveway. They phoned them, no answer. Then the tenants emailed and said that they'd lodged an appeal with the court to ask for an extended stay because the house they're planning on moving is going through refurbishment works and it won't be ready till the middle of June, which I thought was rather lovely. So we're now waiting on my tenants' lovely new property to be refurbished before they'll leave my house that they've not paid rent in since August of last year. So you can imagine the steam was coming out of my ears. So what happens now? So I'm actually not convinced. There's been a whole story here of things from the tenant where they've been saying stuff that hasn't turned out to be true. So I do take everything they say with an incredibly large handful of salt. So the plan is today I'm going to contact my solicitors. They're going to instruct the court bailiff. And then we wait. So either the tenants will move out in June, I really don't think they will, or before that what will happen is we'll get the bailiff notice. So cost of instructing a court bailiff, just so you guys are aware, £350. My cost of legal fees in terms of solicitors kind of work, the Section 21 that I've had to serve twice, and the Section 8 where my court hearing is in August, but I don't think I'm going to have to use that. We're now into over £3,000 worth of fees, plus unpaid rents since August. So the bill is now topping over £20,000. It's been a very expensive exercise this for me. Wish I'd taken out insurance, but hindsight is very, very valuable, isn't it? And that's me for this week. Thank you as always for joining me. I hope you found that helpful. And if you have any questions, you know we'd love to hear from you. 0345 345 6788. Have an amazing week. It's a short one, so you know it can't be too bad, can it? And a great weekend, and I'll catch you same time next week.